People need to feel safe in their homes and in the central city, and right now people don't.
I want to get as far away from Portland as possible. I do not any longer feel safe here.
Imagine living in a war zone 90 plus days.
It was so beautiful before.
It will take years for Portland to recover.
Kind of like zombie land down here.
We need a gigantic reset button in the worst way.
It wasn't that long ago, Portland's star was rising. Now you take a look at the city as it is now and you see boarded up windows, graffiti, piles of trash, humans suffering on the streets, and on any given night, what appears to be lawlessness. It's easy to feel heartbroken and discouraged. Some of our suburban neighbors don't even want to visit downtown anymore. So what's happening to Portland? Are we at a tipping point or a turning point? During this documentary, I'm going to explore some of the tensions happening in the city right now and the struggle over who we are and who we want to become. Portland, Oregon, a city on the rise. At the turn of the century, the heart of Portland was strong. People flocked here to open restaurants and food carts. Small businesses thrived. So did the big ones. The jewel of the Pacific Northwest. A nation saw Portlandia, a quirky, fun city. But that's not what they see now. Portland is a city in high anxiety. About a year ago, COVID-19 infected our nation and Portland was no different. The city shut down to cut the virus off. Portland started to look different, and it wasn't pretty. It was empty. This wasn't a fun town anymore, and it was about to get worse.
Please, I can't breathe.
In late May, we watched George Floyd die over 8 minutes on cell phone footage. Cities across the nation exploded in anger. We actually expected Portland to react. After all, we live in a city proud of its activism. But the protests here put the heart of Portland into full cardiac arrest. The protests started as Black Lives Matter demonstrations. But night after night, the protesters would largely go home, and a different mood dropped in the dark. It wasn't protesting anymore. It was destruction. For 150 nights, a relatively small area of downtown looked like a war zone. And how that played out nationally changed how people looked at the Rose City. The president called us lawless and worse.
If they called us in Portland, we would put out that fire in a half an hour, but they won't do it because they're run by radical left Democrats.
It's been a year of strife. 2020 exposed the underbelly of a city in struggle. We have a fight on our hands, a fight for the soul of Portland. Alex HOFFBERG opened Watchworks 30 years ago. For decades, his business thrived in the heart of Portland, here at 10th and Morrison. He watched Portland's global reputation flourish.
Oregon's magnet draw for wine culture, for food culture, for handmade stuff, for gourmet everything, to even the reefer culture, brought a lot of people to do business with us.
But as the city grew, so did its problems.
We've suffered smash and grabs. We've had people just dart out of the store holding valuable objects. We've had people sleeping in the doorway, heroin use, needles, feces, just crazies walking in and trying to cause trouble. Downtown is a mixed bag, as I'm sure you know, and it's become more and more and more unstable.
2020 and the coronavirus global pandemic knocked down whatever stability remained for Alex.
I had significant plans for expansion, not contraction.
In March of 2020, COVID ruled the Rose City. Empty streets, stores closed, people forced to stay home. But during the last week of May, guidelines relaxed for stores like Watchworks. Alex was hopeful, but that didn't last long.
All of the work of bringing the computers back and the watchmaking equipment back and the inventory back and taking inventory because things got scattered in months of disorientation To be looted that following Friday night. We were there for roughly 4 days.
On the night of May 29th, 4 days after the death of George Floyd, protests over his death in Minneapolis turned to riots in cities all across the country. The streets of Portland were out of control. Alex's phone rang at 2 a.m., notifying him his windows were shattered.
I knew that there were people inside, not just a broken window.
His entire inventory at stake. Alex and his wife drove to the store in the middle of the riot.
I went in by myself, and it was not a comfortable, happy moment in my life.
Alex packed up his 30-year watch and jewelry store and moved out of downtown. He doesn't plan to return anytime soon.
In the next 2 years, we will not be establishing a store downtown.
Alex's business wasn't the only one hit. Dozens were looted or vandalized that night. Police called it a full-on riot, and it went on and on. Night after night, 150 nights in a row of unrest. Many demonstrations turned violent, and sometimes we didn't even know what to call them when the Black Lives Matter message got lost in destruction. Whatever the intention, during that time, some businesses lost their livelihoods. They wanted the city to stop violence, restore order. Instead, the agitators ruled downtown.
Oh my goodness.
I spoke with Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler about the perception that downtown is unsafe, and some people are afraid.
Well, there is a lot of negative press out there. Let's be honest.
What he says the media isn't showing enough of are signs of recovery and positive progress in downtown right now. You mentioned the businesses and the media attention, that maybe we're not paying as much attention to the ones that are opening. But Clean and Safe and Portland Business Alliance just did a survey of the businesses downtown, and so many of them, they say the city isn't safe downtown, and a lot of them are considering moving within the next 2 years. Some have already moved. So how do you reassure them that it's safe to operate?
Yeah, and that's a fair concern, and I totally understand why people feel that way. There was actually a recent study that was done in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and I think it was San Francisco. It was the fourth city where 54% of businesses that were surveyed said they were either already planning to leave or were considering leaving those cities as a result of all of the things that you just mentioned. So it's not just Portland.
He said once the pandemic is over and businesses can fully reopen, he admits the city has a lot of work to do to make downtown a place where people want to go again. Andrew Hone is the president of the Portland Business Alliance.
It's that moment in time that's a precious moment, inflection point for not just our economy, not just for the business community, but for the whole community. And I think a lot is at stake right now.
No doubt the global pandemic of 2020, COVID-19, jolted the world, but here in Portland, it created space for another crisis to flourish. The vacuum the pandemic created in downtown was filled with civil unrest. It was in those months following the COVID shutdown, the Rose City with all its thorns was thrust into the national spotlight.
You take the ultimate example as Portland. It's been terrible for a long time.
The glare unflattering.
The brand of Portland externally has taken an impact, a negative impact, but the impacts to the brand are not permanent.
The outlook looks grim. Recently, the Portland Business Alliance questioned people in our region. 70% say the quality of life here is getting worse. Homelessness is the top concern. Many downtown businesses are thinking of giving up on Portland.
We have actually put our building on the market. And because it's been so stressful, I just can't do it any longer.
The nonprofit group Downtown Portland Clean and Safe says 62% of business owners believe the central city is no longer safe. A third of businesses surveyed at the end of 2020 plan to move out of downtown in the next 2 years. Restaurant group Chef's Table is already moving popular spots like St. Jack, Grassa, Lardo, and Oven and Shaker to the suburbs.
Well, we've just seen surrounding areas to be much busier than to downtown Portland. There's a lot of concerns in Portland about just going out and about, especially downtown. And surrounding communities haven't had the protests or anything like that. So and they seem to be much more resilient when it comes to especially the dining situations.
It would be understandable to blame the moves on COVID or last summer's political unrest with protests that turned destructive, vandalizing businesses. But Chef's Group owner Kurt Huffman made the decision 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. He says communities outside of downtown flourish more than in the city core. James Beard award-winning chef Vitaly Paley closed two of his popular downtown restaurants at the end of 2020, Imperial and Headwaters at the Heathman Hotel.
People wanted to stay closer to home. They felt safer in their environment. There was no need for them to travel downtown. It was just plain and simple.
He decided to focus all his energy into his original Northwest Portland neighborhood restaurant, Paley's Place.
I think those people who live in our neighborhood felt safer to stay in the neighborhood. And so we really fell into that niche to be able to do that. Downtown theaters were closed, shopping was done. There's no sporting events. There's nobody staying at the hotel.
At least 170 businesses temporarily closed within the past year in the heart of the city. Some are doing online shopping only. But it still represents roughly 30% of retail shops and restaurants downtown, and possibly a mortal blow in the fight for the soul of Portland. May 29th was the beginning of nightly summer protests in the Rose City. Sparked by social injustice, the death of George Floyd, Portland, a city labeled as one of the whitest in America, turned out in full force in support of Black lives. Thousands of people marched. Powerful images like this, hundreds lying face down on the Burnside Bridge. Thousands marching peacefully in solidarity. Through the streets, even into neighborhoods. But then too many marches turned destructive once the sun went down. Those marches continued for 150 straight days. Shops already barely making ends meet during a global pandemic, now forced to board up windows night after destructive night. The messages became mixed. SALOME CHIMUKU co-founded the Black Millennial Movement and took part in several marches.
So I think that's how we need to look at the spray paint. That's how we need to look at the broken windows, is those are people who have literally been pushed to a point where their humanity has not been seen. And for the first time, they felt seen. And they wanted people to remember that. And that's how they wanted people to see that and go, that's me. I want you to see me because you haven't been seeing me this whole time.
She's heard the complaints from downtown business owners who say constant destructive demonstrations have a negative impact on their lives and livelihoods.
It's understandable to feel that way because most of the time as human beings, when we're faced with something, we think about the self and we think about how this is going to impact me. I would also say, though, as sick and tired as they are of having like spray paint on their windows, things go through their windows, folks who identify as Black are sick and tired of being perceived as threats on a daily basis, and that the comfort of others is worth the risk of our lives.
Some established Black business owners see it differently. Sam Fowler owns Oliver Twist on the edge of downtown in the Pearl.
Some of those activities have hijacked the message. When I hear people talk about all of the issues that were going on last summer in particular with the Black Lives Matter, the violence had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter.
Michael Llewellyn is the chairman of the Urban League. He's spent several years in Portland watching it grow. He acknowledges Portland has a painful and shameful history when it comes to the Black community.
If nothing else, this entire experience that has transpired here should teach us just what the ravages of fear, mistrust, and disenfranchisement can really do when those who have had enough and those who have found themselves on the victim end of whether it's crime, on the victim end of the downturn of an economy, when they rise up, they need to be heard.
And what may have started out as frustration surrounding systemic racism in our city morphed.
First legitimate wave of social justice protests that were going on under the Black Lives Matter movement, and then what I think many of us saw was the hijacking of the background of the Black Lives Matter movement to become an excuse for much worse activity.
And that destructive activity became such a distraction, Portland was mentioned nightly during stump speeches on the presidential campaign trail.
We could fix up Portland so fast they have to invite us, and I want to be invited into that one. We would fix that like we did Minneapolis.
And people who live thousands of miles from Portland, who have never been to this city, have no concept of our leadership, no concept of the commitment of the people who live here. All they could go on is what they saw and the images and the words that the national media wrapped around it. And so it could give people the impression that things have gone crazy out here.
Some of this obviously isn't working.
It was crazy for Gabe Johnson. Born and raised in Portland, he's become so disenfranchised by the state of the city, he formed an online group called the Coalition to Save Portland.
With this explosion of lawlessness and riots and destruction, it's not what Portland's about.
He lives directly across the street from where many nightly protests took place, just outside the federal courthouse and city hall.
Literally, if you wanted a front row seat, just stand up here or just come out your front door.
Portland is a city known for activism, but this was different. The summer riots cost millions of dollars in damage and lost business. It took a toll on downtown.
I think that the Antifa component of BLM has totally taken away from it. And I saw that the very first day that I was down here. For me, it hasn't represented a movement at all.
And the damage was beyond what you could see, spray painted on walls or through smashed windows. It was emotional.
This is not what Portland is about.
The sense of security now gone.
The lack of, I should say, safety, public safety. People, my neighbors, have been attacked just walking through this park.
The daily disturbances have calmed with an occasional and sometimes destructive flare-up, but the fear remains downtown.
We have all been scared. We were like in hostage the whole time. We felt like hostages during the riots. Then we come out, and now we're still kind of living scared.
Mayor Wheeler says addressing these types of concerns is a key part of his public safety plan for downtown.
I'm focusing on protest management, making sure that if people engage in acts of violence or criminal destruction, they're held accountable. And we've certainly seen that happen when it comes to homelessness.
I would argue that people say that people are not being held accountable. We hear from a lot of people who say we see these protests turn to riots, turn to vandalism downtown on a regular basis, or they're popping up again, and they don't see people being held accountable. In fact, they see the city in a form of lawlessness.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that characterization at all. And moreover, I would look at what has actually been happening on the streets in recent weeks.
The mayor pointed to a recent protest in the Pearl District where police used a tactic called kettling to stop a demonstration they expected to turn destructive. But for people like Michael Llewellyn, that change in strategy didn't come nearly soon enough.
I'm not saying that the pictures and the images were unfair, because they weren't. That was not a Hollywood production. That was not a made-for-TV movie. Those fires were real. The clashes with our police, sadly, were real. The smashing of the glass in the buildings and the robbing of some of those stores downtown, that was real. So because of it, then the recovery from that has to be real as well.
But Llewellyn says time is not a luxury. He worries more businesses will grow weary and move from the downtown core, just like Alex HOFFBERG and Watchworks, to survive.
If we don't strike soon and those businesses just make their mind up that they're leaving downtown and they're not coming back, then we've got trouble on our hands.
I sat down with one of the newest members of Portland City Council, Commissioner Mingus Mapps.
What would you say to the people who haven't been back since COVID hit, since our social unrest, since our hijacked message of Black Lives Matter, since the constant riots that kind of are still taking place? What would you say to those people?
Don't give up on Portland. It's still the same city that you grew up with. It's still the same city that you loved. Obviously we're challenged right now. We still have too many businesses closed due to COVID, and there is a homelessness crisis on our streets, and there's just no way around that.
The homeless crisis, another, if not the most obvious struggle we see daily on Portland streets, where many see the need and not the heart in the soul of Portland. Dan Lenzen owns Dixie Tavern in Old Town.
What's interesting is we've got a lot of partners in our entertainment district, and the number one concern is really the homeless. They're not really worried about the protests.
There's plenty to be concerned about surrounding our homeless community. Because of COVID, this year, the city could not make an accurate count of the number of people living on the street. It's safe to say it's in the thousands.
And it's bad out here. It is bad, and they're not doing anything about it.
The human suffering alone is heartbreaking. For shops, bars, and restaurants, it's a threat to their own economic livelihood. Sam Fowler owns Oliver Twist.
I have people on my patio who obviously need to be institutionalized. They really do. I mean, they're doing things on my patio that is nowhere near normal, okay? But it's against their civil rights or civil liberties to say, hey, I'm going to take you away and I'm going to put you somewhere and I'm going to address your problem.
There's no clear answer, but one thing I heard time and time again, businesses are tired of waiting on city leaders.
I understand you've only been on the job for 3 months, so I get that. But I keep hearing a lot of criticism that the city is just not doing enough, fast enough, and that a lot of local organizations and community groups are doing the heavy lifting right now. How would you respond to that?
I don't disagree with that. I know that every member of council and every city employee is working really hard to turn things around, but we need to work harder still.
The city stopped homeless sweeps during COVID because of health and safety reasons. Many shelters closed or were overloaded. So community members have picked up where many services left off.
I have probably handed out over 200 sleeping bags.
Linda WABS has been helping the homeless since 2003. She started by volunteering at the PEAVYHOUSE, then went out on her own.
Going to public places like in front of 7-Eleven, or bus stops, grocery stores. I'll see someone on the corner, or walking down the street, and then I just kind of just roll down my window and holler out, hey, are you doing okay? Do you need a sleeping bag or anything? And most of the time they say, yeah.
She's not easily stunned by what she sees on Portland streets until a friend told her about a woman named Jasmine, sleeping nearly naked on a mattress on 2nd and Burnside. Linda started making calls.
She does need help, but she doesn't want help, and that's where everybody gets stuck.
Shelters can't force someone to get help, so Linda drove down with supplies in hand.
Cars are going back and forth, and people are walking by, and there's a woman sleeping on the street on the mattress. And people are just going about their day. This cannot be for real, and that's where I feel like we've failed as a society. This is so wrong. How did we get here?
She feels we've become numb to seeing people sleeping, living on the streets.
I want to remind everybody, this is someone's family member. This is someone's daughter.
Linda feels like it's a critical moment in our city's timeline to help our most vulnerable citizens.
All of my friends and family are really concerned about the homeless and what's going on down here. And they're also heartbroken to what's happened to our city. And I don't know how to mend this place. I mean, doing nothing is not working.
It's not that city leaders have done nothing. Mayor Ted Wheeler ordered and received an increase of more than 360 shelter beds in 2020. Portland's Here Together measure, 26210, that Metro voters passed last year, will provide supportive services, not just beds, to help homeless who have mental health and substance abuse problems. Not a full solution, but an offensive move to save the city. We see it everywhere. Graffiti, broken windows. It's the unfortunate look of downtown. From March of 2020 to November 2020, vandalism in Portland's commercial districts went up 47%.
Right here. Perfect.
Thank you.
Since last fall, Solve Oregon, a volunteer-based organization, has taken on 6 major cleanup projects downtown.
Decided instead of just complaining about it and started to do something about it. I feel bad for our city.
Carl Strand volunteered with Solve for the first time. He's one of a couple thousand Portlanders taking the initiative to clean up the trash.
There's a lot of social issues that are causing this, it's hard to see a beautiful city like this have waste and trash everywhere.
Crowds that typically fill the sidewalk are gone. The number of people walking around downtown dropped more than 80%. This is according to the Portland Business Alliance. Quite a stark difference to the lively buzz pre-pandemic when more than 100,000 people crowded our city core downtown every day to work, shop, eat, and be entertained. That dramatic swing has affected how safe people feel in the heart of the city.
I feel safer when I'm on something like a bike or a scooter in my car, but walking alone, I don't come out after the sun goes down.
And when the people who still live downtown are afraid, businesses suffer. David Margulis' jewelry store is a family business. His dad opened it nearly 90 years ago during one of the worst economic downturns in our country's history, and it flourished. But he's concerned.
We need our city government to really enforce the laws. We have to enforce the laws, because if people think there are no consequences for doing negative things or doing any kind of vandalism, it just continues. And so all of our city council have to be strong about consequences and defending the businesses so that they're protected.
Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler made it a major point in his State of the City address last month.
The ongoing criminal vandalism must stop. It holds small businesses hostage behind plywood. This affects not just downtown, but it impacts all of us in this community. We're fighting criminal destruction, intimidation, and violence.
I've never seen anything close to this.
Greg Goodman is the co-president of real estate firm Downtown Development Group. He wants to see more action from our city leaders.
Until you make people feel safe, people need to feel safe in their homes and in the central city, and right now people don't.
We asked to talk with Portland's police chief about crime in the city. His office has declined comment for this discussion. But Jim FERRARIS did talk to me. He's the president of the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police. He says the public sector has to live up to expectations of the community to feel safe.
A lot of the perception surrounding Portland right now is that it's a lawless community, that people can get away with smashing windows, doing graffiti. What kind of atmosphere does that feed when when people are not being arrested?
Well, it continues to perpetuate the problems at hand. So crime continues to flourish, citizen safety becomes an ever-increasing concern.
FERRARIS spent 30 years with the Portland Police Bureau, including as assistant chief of police before serving as the chief of police in Woodburn. He's quite familiar with the Bureau.
They just don't have enough police officers to handle the day-to-day work. That's a big issue, and that's a critical issue.
According to police data, the city has the fewest number of officers on its force since the early 90s. A statistic FERRARIS says doesn't help amid recent talks to defund police.
Devastating impact on the police bureau, not only from a morale standpoint in terms of hopelessness and a feeling of lack of support from those holding the purse strings and controlling policy in the city, but also hopelessness because where's the community?
The community, it seems, is suffering from a similar type of hopelessness because many don't see city leaders as reliable allies in the fight for the soul of Portland. While some businesses have already made the decision to leave downtown Portland, others see it as an opportunity to invest, including Randall WILLHITE, the owner of Po' Boy's restaurant.
I'm the kind of person that usually likes to zig when everybody else is zagging.
Randall opened his food cart in 2019 and is moving to a brick and mortar spot in Old Town. But the same problems that have forced others to shutter their doors and move has already attacked his new location.
I am worried about some of the homelessness and things like that and vandalism. I did get the window bust out over there, so that did happen at the restaurant. But you know what? We're just gonna push forward. I just feel like honestly, God's with us, and we're gonna push forward.
Aviv is another restaurant that recently moved downtown a couple of months ago from Southeast Portland. Sous chef Jared Russell believes the soul of Portland will return to what it once was.
I mean, we can only hope so. Yeah, so much has changed just in the past year, and
it's sad because there's so many good things that have shut down and a lot of our community is struggling. So hopefully we can make that a little bit better and give people some more options.
It's faith that the Rose City will bloom again.
It does worry me. Honestly, sometimes I can't sleep at night, but I just got to push forward because I just think that basically things are going to change.
He's investing in the city, hoping his move will help jumpstart life back into Portland. Portland, a city struggling with its demons, not on life support, not yet. How can we move forward? It'll take more work than replacing windows and washing the spray paint away.
It's just one thing after another.
Dr. DEANA JULKA is the chair of psychological sciences at the University of Portland.
You have boarded up windows. Again, it's a different psychological sense. Most of the people I talk to experience a real sadness. That's the living room of Portland, right? And it's not only the economic hub, but it's a neighborhood itself as well, with people living and working. And there's a lot of sadness in the experience of it right now.
Mayor Ted Wheeler acknowledges the city has 3 giant problems to tackle:
homelessness, public safety, and livability. And by livability, I mean specifically giving our city a deep clean, cleaning up the litter, abating the graffiti, and getting our city ready for reopening as COVID abates.
Mayor Wheeler said he's working with law enforcement and city partners to get a handle on issues plaguing downtown. But the downtown business core wants more than talk, saying timing is everything.
People don't return over the next year. You're going to have the independent merchants and small merchants migrating out to neighborhoods and leaving downtown because they can't hold on forever.
It's happened in other cities in our nation. Leaders in our community say we need to be honest about our resources.
Well, downtowns and other major urban areas that suffered through either riots or violence or economic plight can take decades to recover, and levels of investment that we may not have here in Oregon.
Could the pulse of the city return with the sun in the next few months? And the distribution of COVID vaccines?
I think Portland is in a real good position to do that, but this summer should be, it's going to be close. Let's put it like that.
Could this be our turning point? An opportunity to create a new version of the Rose City? A turning point if we act.
We're on the cusp of that positive trend, which we've all been hoping for and waiting for. And I am way more bullish on Portland and downtown than anyone who would suggest to the contrary. And we know that it's evidenced right here with the removal of boards and fences, openings of new stores are all around us.
Or a tipping point. If Portland fails to act, businesses that have already left downtown believe the community must face the issues.
I love what Portland was. And I'm not so sure that currently I can love what Portland has become. I would like to think that Portland will recover and go back to being what it was.
The heartbeat of the city may seem faint right now, but there are signs of life. According to Joe Zender, the chief city planner in Portland, Portland has the ability to thrive again.
Central City still has the bone, still has the foundation of what made it a great place before. Between the social upheaval and the appearance and the crime and just the humanitarian issue of people needing to camp because they lack housing, it's become a concentration of those kind of problems. But those are not essentially Central City problems. Those are just problems of our time.
Luella Scott continues to carry on the tradition with her business that has represented and survived in Portland for more than 100 years. She knows the downtown core is the true heart of the city.
I just think that we're struggling. I think that there is some real determination on the part of our downtown businesses to hang in there and stay the course and to prove that we can be the lifeblood of our city.
We keep hearing from you in the community that we need to find a path forward.
We don't have the answers here, but we'll continue to question city leaders and hold them accountable as we all fight for the soul of Portland.